If it hadn't been for the estate sale, Thomas would never have found the lock. It was one of those rainy Thursday mornings in late October. Grey skies, biting wind, and the scent of wet leaves clinging to the air. Thomas Hayes, a 52-year-old retired locksmith, had wandered into the auction purely out of boredom. The sign outside the old Victorian house read, "Final estate sale. Everything must go." A man of habit, Thomas rarely deviated from routine. But that day something tugged at him. Maybe it was the weather. Maybe it was the strange way the house seemed to lean toward him when he glanced at it. He stepped inside, shaking off the rain. The house smelled of dust and forgotten time. Most of the items were what you'd expect. Old furniture, chipped porcelain, dusty books. But then he saw it. Tucked away on a velvet cloth at the back of the hallway table was a small brass lock. It was old, no key, no markings, just a weighty, intricate design with an almost imperceptible shimmer when the light hit it just right. Despite being surrounded by antiques, it somehow felt out of place. He picked it up, and an odd warmth pulsed through his palm. "How much for this?" Thomas asked the elderly woman behind the makeshift counter. She looked at the lock, and her smile faltered. "That one? Strange little thing. Found it in the attic. No one seems to know where it came from. Honestly, you can have it." Thomas nodded, placing a few crumpled bills in the donation jar out of courtesy. The lock was his. He didn't know why he wanted it, but it fascinated him. It wasn't just a lock. It was a puzzle, a challenge. And for a man who'd made his living solving the mysteries of metal and mechanism, it was irresistible. Back home, he placed it on his workbench under his magnifier. He turned it, examined it, tapped it lightly. No seams, no keyhole. Just the faintest, almost biological click when he moved it in a certain direction. That sound wasn't mechanical, it was organic. Something about it unsettled him. That night, Thomas dreamed of doors. Hundreds of them. Endless rows of doors. All sealed with brass locks identical to the one now sitting in his home. The dream was silent. No wind, no footfalls. Just him walking, trying handles, touching locks. And behind one door, he heard it, whispering, low, urgent, incomprehensible whispers that seemed to call his name. He woke up gasping, drenched in sweat. He went to his workroom. The lock was gone. He stared at the empty velvet cloth. "What the hell?" he muttered, pacing. Then he saw it, lying in front of his bedroom door, as if it had moved there on its own. He hadn't sleepwalked in years. Had he touched it in the night? No, he was certain. But the lock! It wanted to be on a door. He couldn't explain it, but he began trying the lock on every door in his house. It didn't latch or click onto any of them. But each time he tried, he felt something. Pressure in his chest, a heaviness behind his eyes, like something unseen was pushing back. On the third day, something changed. When he tried the lock on the cellar door, the one he hadn't opened in over a decade, it clicked into place, just like that. No key, just a deep, almost satisfied clunk. The sound echoed through the house like a breath held too long, finally being exhaled. Thomas's hand trembled. He hadn't gone down to the cellar since his wife died. He barely remembered what was down there. The stairs groaned under his weight as he descended, flashlight in one hand, the cellar door creaking shut behind him. The moment he stepped down, a damp, cold air wrapped around him like fingers. The walls, once familiar, now looked warped, like something had been growing beneath the surface. He scanned the room. Shelves, tools, boxes, all untouched. But in the far corner, the one in shadow, there was another door. He froze. That wasn't there before. It was wooden, old, and carved with symbols he couldn't recognize. Circles intersecting with jagged lines, like something ancient. And there, in the center, another lock, identical to his. His breath quickened. He approached slowly, lock in hand, his instincts screaming at him to stop. But he didn't. The lock, his lock, pulled toward the door like it belonged. And when it touched the door, it melted into it, vanishing with a low, metallic moan. The door cracked open a sliver, not enough to see, just enough to hear. Breathing, not his own, wet, rattling, wheezing breathing. He backed up. No, nope. This is insane. He turned, ran up the stairs, slammed the cellar door shut, and placed a heavy chair in front of it. He didn't sleep that night, or the next. Things got worse. He started hearing footsteps in the cellar, slow, dragging steps, then scratching, and the lock. He'd see it in different places every morning, once on his bathroom mirror, once on the inside of the fridge, once clutched in his sleeping hand. He called a friend, a pastor, not out of faith, but desperation. Pastor Lane came, prayed, sprinkled holy water, and told Thomas to get rid of the lock. Burn it, bury it, I don't care. That thing isn't just metal. Thomas tried. He buried it deep in the woods, came home, slept for the first time in days. The next morning, it was back, on his pillow. The final night, the cellar door opened on its own. Thomas heard it from his bed, the creak of wood, the low thud as it hit the wall. He didn't move, couldn't. Something heavy stepped into the hallway. His bedroom door began to shake, violently, then stopped. Silence. Then a knock. Not loud, gentle, rhythmic. The kind of knock you'd answer without thinking. He held his breath. The handle twisted once, then again, and then, slowly, it began to open. He screamed. It began with a noise, soft, rhythmic, like someone tapping on the metal deep within the walls. Mark Redford, 52, had just moved into a renovated brownstone in Boston's South End after his divorce. The place was old, but charming. Tall windows, ornate woodwork, and a heavy brass lock on every door, all recently replaced by the landlord. Old building, weird structure, the agent had warned, but secure as a vault. The first night he heard the tapping at 2:12 a.m. exactly. It came from the floor beneath his bedroom, but his unit was the bottom floor. There was no tenant below, just storage, he'd been told. Mark grabbed a flashlight, descended the creaky back stairs, and found nothing but dusty crates. Yet the sound continued, tap, 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 until sunrise, and then it stopped. Mark visited the landlord the next morning. The man, Mr. Pilgrim, was pale and distracted. When Mark mentioned the tapping, Pilgrim froze, then quietly said, "If it starts again, don't try to open anything." That evening, Mark found a folded note pushed under his door. No envelope, just aged paper and faint handwriting. "Do not tamper with the deadbolt beneath. It is not meant to open." It wasn't signed. There was no deadbolt beneath, or so he thought. Curious and unnerved, Mark returned to the basement. After shifting old crates aside, he found something. A low, square iron hatch embedded in the concrete, covered in dust and sealed with a tarnished brass deadbolt unlike anything he'd ever seen. There was no handle, just the lock, and a single keyhole shaped like a human eye. Over the next few nights, the tapping grew louder. Then came the whispers. They started faint, unintelligible, like water running behind walls. Mark recorded the sounds. When he played them back, his blood ran cold. The whispers weren't random. They were names. Names of previous tenants. He researched the building's history. Tragic stories surfaced, tenants vanishing, heart attacks, breakdowns. Every incident had a pattern, all within a certain number of months after moving in, and all on the bottom floor. Mark became obsessed. He barely ate, barely slept. He found an online locksmith forum and posted about the eye-shaped lock. One user replied, "Do not open. The lock is designed to keep something in, not out." The comment was deleted seconds later. Mark's screen flickered. A new message appeared. "You heard it. It knows your name now." One night, Mark dreamed of the lock. It was pulsing, breathing. Something behind it called to him, not in words, but through memory. He saw flashes of moments he hadn't thought about in years. Regrets, lies, secrets. He awoke at 2:12 a.m., drenched in sweat. The tapping had stopped. Silence pressed in like weight. He felt drawn to the basement. The hatch's deadbolt shimmered as if waiting. Without thinking, Mark reached out. His hand trembled as it hovered above the lock. Then, a blink. The keyhole blinked. He screamed and stumbled back. But when he turned to run, the basement door had vanished. It was a wall now, seamless. Trapped, Mark searched the room. The walls now held dozens of locks, all different, some modern, some ancient, some glowing faintly. And there, on the floor, lay a ring of keys he didn't remember bringing. Each key had a name etched into its shaft, names he recognized, old friends, family, his ex-wife. A voice spoke, not aloud, but inside his head. Choose truth or silence. Mark hesitated, then picked a key labelled Nathaniel, his estranged brother. A door appeared. He unlocked it. Inside was a room from his childhood, a memory, a fight, a lie that sent Nathaniel to prison. He returned to the basement, gasping. The voice again. 3 keys open, 1 will seal, 1 will damn. Mark unlocked 2 more rooms. One revealed an affair, another a betrayal at work. Each time, he was forced to live the memory, not as he remembered it, but as those he'd wronged experienced it. The pain, the anger, the hopelessness. Then the voice offered the last key. Blank, no name. He turned it in the deadbolt. The hatch shuddered. It opened. Below was not darkness, but reflection. A mirror that showed not Mark, but a twisted version. A man weighed down by guilt, clawing at the walls, trapped in memory loops. The voice whispered, "Some locks seal guilt, others open redemption. Few survive the choice." Mark awoke on his bed. Everything seemed normal, but the keys were still in his hand. He tried to throw them away, burn them. They always returned. He moved out, but it followed. Hotels, cabins, even abroad. Wherever he went, at exactly 2:12 a.m., he'd hear the tapping and find a new door, sometimes in walls, sometimes floors, sealed with an eye-shaped lock. Now, Mark doesn't sleep. He wanders, hunted not by monsters, but by memories given form. And behind every door is another chance to confront what he tried to bury. It started with a door, not just any door, but a door to the cellar of a house that had sat untouched for over a decade. When Matthew and Julia bought the old countryside home in Staffordshire, they knew it needed work. They welcomed the creaky floors and peeling wallpaper as part of its charm, but they hadn't expected a door in the middle of the kitchen floor, hidden beneath a mismatched rug. A door with a lock, an old iron bolt embedded in the wood, without a key in sight. "I don't remember seeing this during the viewing," Julia whispered, staring at it. Matthew knelt and ran his fingers along the rusted edge. "It's like someone didn't want anyone going down there." They both laughed nervously, but neither of them tried opening it. That night, a loud metallic clank echoed through the house. They bolted upright in bed. "Did you hear that?" Julia gasped. Matthew nodded, already grabbing the flashlight. He tiptoed into the kitchen. The rug was slightly shifted, only by a few inches, but enough to see the edge of that lock, still closed, still untouched. Julia insisted they bring in a locksmith, curious what lay beneath. Old houses had wine cellars, storm shelters, even secret rooms. The man who came was named Albie, grey-haired, hunched, with long fingers that moved like they remembered things his mouth couldn't. The moment he saw the lock, his expression froze. "Where did you say you got this house?" he asked, eyes narrowed. "Just a few towns over. Bought it last month," Matthew replied. Albie bent over the lock, not touching it. "I've only seen one like this before, designed not to keep people out, but to keep something in." He laughed, though his voice cracked slightly. But when he tried his tools, none of them worked, not even the electric pick. It was as if the lock wasn't mechanical. It didn't click. It didn't budge. "I can't open it. And you shouldn't try," he muttered before leaving. A week later, Matthew found the lock undone. Not broken, not forced, just open. "Did you mess with it?" he asked Julia, heart thumping. "I haven't touched it," she replied, eyes wide. Driven by a mix of dread and curiosity, Matthew pulled the door open. It moaned like a wounded animal. A narrow wooden staircase descended into the dark. The air that poured out was cold and metallic, like blood and rain. They stood there in silence. Then, as if pushed by something unseen, Matthew took the first step down. Each board groaned. The walls were made of stone, carved with symbols he couldn't recognize. At the bottom, a single bulb swung from the ceiling, flickering weakly. In the center of the room, a chain hung from a ceiling hook wrapped around a small iron box, sealed with the same kind of lock. "What the hell is this?" he whispered. Julia didn't answer. She was staring behind him. "Matt, someone just closed the door." They scrambled back up the stairs, but the hatch wouldn't budge. It was locked again, from the outside. Matthew pounded the door. Julia cried out, but then something made them freeze. A whisper echoed from the stone around them. "Do you remember me?" They turned slowly. One of the walls moved. The stone shifted, crumbling like it was breathing. And then, a face pressed out, stretched, sunken, screaming silently. The wall swallowed it again. They were no longer alone. Matthew backed up into the corner. "What is this place?" The bulb above them pulsed. With each flicker, more faces emerged from the stone. Trapped, distorted, weeping. Julia was shaking violently. "I think they're locked in. That's what this place is for. It's a prison." A sound like dragging metal scraped through the dark. Then came the voice, not like before. This was louder, closer, inhuman. "You broke the seal." From the far end of the cellar, the iron box began to rattle. It shook violently, pulling the chain taut. Then it burst open. Something crawled out. Not walking, crawling, clicking, like bone scraping against bone. A figure wrapped in locks and chains, head covered with a rusted steel mask. Julia screamed and ran up the stairs. Matthew followed, beating on the trap door until his hands bled. The door opened, but not because of them. Something on the other side had unlocked it. They bolted out, collapsing on the kitchen floor. When they looked back, the door was shut again, locked tight. They sold the house the next day. 10 years passed. Matthew lived alone. Julia left him shortly after the incident. He never blamed her, but the lock never left his mind. One day, while driving through a nearby town, he saw a small antique shop, and in the window sat a familiar object, an iron box with a rusted lock. He entered the shop, trembling. "Where did you get that box?" he asked. The shopkeeper, a woman with pale eyes, smiled. "Oh, it was left here one morning. No note, just appeared." Matthew stared. The lock was the same, and then he noticed the key hanging around the woman's neck. That night he dreamed of the cellar, of the whispering walls, of the faces, and of the voice. "You broke the seal. Now you are the key." He woke up in his bed, sweating, only to find his hands stained with rust. The next morning, the news reported a fire at the antique store. Nothing remained, no survivors, but something else was strange. On his doorstep sat the iron box, locked, no note, no explanation, and around his neck, the key. Matthew tried everything to get rid of the box. He threw it in the river, buried it deep in the woods, but each time it returned, always on his doorstep, always locked. Then the dreams worsened. He saw Julia again, but not as he remembered her. Her mouth sewn shut, eyes wide with horror, standing beside that rusted door, pointing downward. The whispers in the night turned into screams. Objects in his house moved, mirrors cracked, and every morning the box was closer to his bed. It was no longer just a memory. The lock wanted something. It wanted him. Unable to bear it any longer, Matthew drove back to the house they once owned. It had changed owners 3 times since, and now sat abandoned. He entered with the key around his neck, the box in his arms. The kitchen was as he remembered, cold, silent, stained with a history no one could erase. He placed the box on the trapdoor, took a breath, and then unlocked it. The door beneath opened slowly on its own. This time, he didn't hesitate. He descended into the dark and never came back.